UEFA had their tails up. They'd overseen quite possibly one of the greatest football tournaments ever bequeathed to the sport, and now they believed they could make the competition even better by expanding the field. It made sense. There were more than 4 elite countries in European football, and a more inclusive game surely made for a better one. Or so UEFA thought. What they actually did was nearly kill the competition before it ever truly got going. European football had been decorated by teams as genius and varied as Bayern Munich, Ajax and Liverpool, as Saint Etienne, Dynamo Kiev and Anderlecht. The national teams weren't too bad either. Netherlands and West Germany led the way, and nations like Italy, Yugoslavia and Czechoslovakia were of a good quality. Even England were on their way back. An expansion to 8 teams made sense. The format did not. The format and the entire mystique around the tournament played entirely to form. When hooligans took control of the terraces, the Tao of football being played out in front of them was of little importance. This was the age of the sweeper, the defensive football that, teamed with brutal violence in and out of the stadia, made football such an unattractive proposition as the brilliant 70s gave way for the murky 80s. UEFA could have helped. All they would have had to do was to add one more match to the calendar, create a few more days within the tournament, host some semi-finals and scrap the third place playoff. That would be too big brain, too 1984 for UEFA. Instead, 8 teams would be directly funneled through 2 groups directly into the final. Therefore, nations were set on prioritising risk-averse football, defending first and asking questions later. With one nation to qualify from the groups directly to the final, 8 teams frozen with fear took to the cities of Milan, Rome, Turin and Naples. When 1980 came around, there was no Ajax stupefying on the world stage. The heroes of Bayern Munich and West Germany were consigned to paydays in North America and backroom roles in hierarchies at top-level clubs. The football being played by the fringes of European kings couldn't be played by the national teams. The divisive states of the Soviet Union or even Belgium couldn't coexist for long enough to play football that Anderlecht or Dynamo Kiev did. France couldn't cobble together a winning machine out of players from Saint Etienne or those playing abroad, mainly in Serie A. Italy, first and foremost when it came to defensive football, was certainly implicated in this, but not in the typical way on the pitch, but what we've come to regard as an incredibly Italian way off it. Surrounding what should have been a celebration of Italian football was scandal at its very core, as night follows day. And it all started with one man just trying to sell another man a banana. Alvaro Trinca ran a restaurant, Massimo Cruciani supplied his fruit. Together they were invited into a betting ring thanks to friends and acquaintances. And that's perfectly fine. I've not been on Twitter for a while, but Footy Accumulators is literally just that, isn't it? A betting community. Except they probably aren't fixing matches like this betting circle was. When results of pre-agreed matches didn't transpire how they wanted, Trinca and Cruciani went to the authorities, and so began Totonero. Heads of the Italian FA rolled, clubs as lofty as Milan and Lazio were relegated, and players as lofty as European Championship winning goalkeeper Ricky Albertozzi and the almighty Paolo Rossi were banned. There must have been some light at the end of the tunnel, known as Euro 1980. First and foremost, England were back. After 10 years away from any semblance of international competition, Ron Greenwood had finally broken the Three Lions duck by steamrolling a qualifying group featuring both Northern and the Republic of Ireland, Bulgaria and a not yet up to speed Denmark. With European club football seemingly some kind of English plaything, surely there would be enough talent in the squad that translated onto the national team. Liverpool had won the European Cup in 1977 and 78 and would do so again in 1981, but England couldn't obviously rely on their Scottish trio of Alan Hansen, Graham Souness and of course Kenny Dalglish. Nottingham Forest had followed Liverpool's glories by completing a double of their own in 1979 and 80. But again, talent like Kenny Burns, John McGovern and John Robertson were from the other side of the border. Plus, Trevor Francis had torn his Achilles and could barely walk, never mind play a game of football. Confidence would be sufficiently shot when even Wales went and pumped them 4-1 in a warm-up friendly. Still, West Germany would be strong again, guaranteed, except they were managing their own transition away from the heroes of the 1970s. In fact, just one player from the final defeat to Czechoslovakia in 1976 would appear in Italy. Still, they demolished all competition in qualifying, joining England and a plucky Belgian team as the undefeated sides. Joop de Waal had yet to taste defeat as West German manager. West Germany was in an incredibly strong position as they had supplied 5 of the 8 UEFA Cup quarter-finalists and all of its semi-finalists in the season approaching Euro 1980. Belgium, of course, were less imperious as they slinked through undefeated, yes, but Guy Thys had scraped them through on a foundation of 4 wins and 4 draws. Wilfred van Moor had been coaxed out of retirement and heroes welcome to edge the Red Devils over the line. Outside of him, nobody remained from Gothal's 1972 team. Thys, who had taken over the country between shambolic qualification playoff defeats against the Dutch in '76, had assembled a solid team. He prioritised work rate and looked to the provinces to collect his talent. No longer did the team rely on Anderlecht, Standard Liège and Club Brugge. From clubs as lowly as Beveren, Lokeren and Waregem, integral players such as Jean-Marie Pfaff, Mark Millikamp and Julian Coles were unearthed. Belgium danced into the competition as a formed team, beating challengers such as Austria, Portugal and Scotland, yet nobody believed they could make an imprint on this competition. They would be joined by Spain, qualifiers out of Group 3 after their heroics away in Zagreb, and Craiova had set La Roja apart from Yugoslavia and Romania. Still, they were made to work for what was their qualification in Limassol against Cyprus, and like Belgium, were expected not to do much in Group B. Another team that made a meal out of qualification were the Netherlands, a country that couldn't have fallen much further from their heyday. Jans Voort Kruijs, assistant manager from the previous Euros, had managed to keep a hold of some of the experienced older heads such as Ruud Krol, Arie Haan, Johnny Rep and the Van der Kerkhoffs. But notably, too much quality had evaporated. Notably, Johan Cruyff had played his last match after kidnapping fears in advance of the 1978 World Cup, and the likes of Rob Rensenbrink, Wim Serbia and Wim Jansen had all joined him in retirement. One star who could have played but didn't was Johan Neeskens, still firmly entrenched in his peak. He skipped out on a qualifier with Poland on short notice and skipped out on European football altogether when he joined the North American Soccer League outfit New York Cosmos. He was making money when he could have been making memories with the national team. The Dutch nearly weren't at the games altogether after they sunk minnows Switzerland and Iceland and struggled to just 1 point against Poland home and away before falling to 2 down against East Germany in their final qualifier. Needing a point to qualify against Poland on goal difference, Franz Zissen found an opportune goal at an opportune time on the stroke of half-time to silence 90,000 in Leipzig. The deficit was overturned and the Dutch squeaked through. The field was made up of Czechoslovakia, who somehow escaped a burgeoning French outfit in Group 5, whilst a plucky Greek team managed to beat all of their opponents in a manic Group 6. Useless away from home but solid in the home comforts of Athens and Thessaloniki, they weren't expected to do much. Meanwhile, the Czechs were holding on a little too tightly to their glories of the past as their aged stars from '76 all lined up in Italy 4 years on. With a dearth of true quality thin on the ground, a horrific structure to the competition and rampant violence in and out of the stands, Euro 1980 would be a competition to forget. If West Germany were the engine driving the prior 2 European Championships from an exciting perspective, they did the same for the 3rd straight championships, only now they dictated a more cerebral pace. Rise and shine Wednesday morning in the middle of June sometime in 1980. West Germany's tournament started with the type of luck that could render any kind of tilt towards a trophy moot. Herbert Zimmermann, one of Jupp Derval's trusty lieutenants, injured himself standing up. Seriously, which ended his tournament instantly. Derval played to the gallery in selecting 7 defenders and keeping the electric Bernd Schuster on the bench. The one piece of quality came from Karl-Heinz Rummenigge in a 1-0 win over Czechoslovakia at the Olympico. If West Germany were a shadow of their former selves, there wasn't an apter phrase for their opponents other than over the hill. They would find a response 3 days later in Rome in front of a sparsely, yet adequately attended Olympico. Just 7,614 souls were stuffed into the National Stadium to witness Antonin Panenka score another European Championship goal, the first in a 3-1 win that would ultimately have zero bearing on the group. The prohibitive format had strung both teams before the match had even started. Earlier that afternoon, the heavyweight clash between West Germany and Netherlands took place. The Dutch were reeling off nearly meeting their match against whipping boys Greece. In the end, a second-half penalty spared their blushes. They'd have no such luck in the same Stadio San Paolo 3 days later. By the time the Netherlands hit their belated gas, Klaus Olofs had scored the first European Championship hat-trick to be completed in normal time, and almost wasn't picked after his turgid turnout against the Czechs. Then again, all 22 players had been ranted in that particular encounter. It killed the game, all but killed the group, despite Netherlands' efforts to repair the damage with 2 late strikes from Johnny Rep and Willy van der Kerkhoff. It was an antidote to cure the tiresome football of the championships. Unfortunately, its effects wore off almost instantaneously. Given the format, Netherlands and Czechoslovakia needed to hope for a win against the other and miracles to go their way elsewhere. Typically, neither of the pair could summon a victory in front of just 11,000 people in the San Siro as they traded goals either side of the break. Far from a disgrace of hee-haw moment, as we would see 2 years later, West Germany and Greece concluded the group a few hours later with all the formalities secured. Both plumped for reserves, neither scored, and the championships that failed to keep giving went very much the same way in one of the more dour goalless draws. Either way, Czechoslovakia finished second and had to pencil themselves in for a further 4 nights in Italy, whilst the Dutch and Greeks had the respite of escape. West Germany, despite no kind of entertainment as in 1972 or 76, were fast-tracked to the final. But just who would they meet? The mind games were out in full force in advance of Group B's anticlimactic opener in Turin between the supposed whipping boys Belgium and England, whom Belgian manager Guy Thys labelled as favourites to win the tournament. Funny, but they barely had a stake on the claim of being favourites to win the group. In the event, 3 minutes midway through the first half marked the highlights of a game where Belgium's offside trap ruined England's desire of taking anything away from the game. Ray Wilkins' beautiful opening goal was quickly rebuffed by Jan Koelemans. Once those formalities were taken care of inside 29 minutes, the real entertainment began as the fighting between the Italians and English took place on the stands of the Stadio Comunale. Tear gas rained down on the pitch, clogging up Ray Clements and defender Kenny Sampson as the football in this football tournament became a sideshow to the real action. The match was suspended for a few minutes and never truly got going again, if it ever did in the first place. With calls to expel the demonised English fans, UEFA came up with the mad idea of fining the FA £1 for every England supporter in Italy, deemed to be £8,000 somehow. Ron Greenwood wasn't happy, taking his frustrations out on the supporters, stating, "We have done everything to create the right impression here, then these bastards let you down. I wish they would all be put on a boat and dropped in the ocean." England's tournament would be over 3 days later, which Greenwood had little sound bites for in the end. In a tournament played in such tempestuous moods, only the host nation could pull in a crowd that was somewhat acceptable, even if only 46,000 pitched up at the San Siro for Italy's opener against Spain. in which, almost precisely, nothing happened, with most Italy fans only turning up to voice their frustrations about the Totonero scandal. Again, the football took a back seat. 2 matches, 2 goals and 0 victories for any of the 4 teams on show. The tournament was in danger of becoming terminal. One glimmer of light, one shiny coin in the sunshine on a beach of mucky seaweed that was Euro 1980 was Belgium and their star player Wilfried van Moor. Rolling back the years, he put in the kind of performance against Spain that the whole continent was crying out for. Controlling the encounter, he oversaw Eric Goretz and Julian Cole's goals in a 2-1 win over Spain. If there had been a greater footballing comeback, I've yet to see one. Van Moor suffered 4 leg breaks in 4 successive years in the 1970s, starting against Group B opponents Italy. His renaissance at Euro 1980 at the age of 35 was a rare bright spot, not only in the group, but in the tournament as a whole. The biggest crowd of the games turned out in Turin, the majority of them spoiling for a fight. The build-up to England and Italy's Group B clash, a match where only the winner could keep their flame alight, was ironically kicked off by a Thomas Cook bus being set on fire in the middle of the city. Fortunately, nobody was on board and very few English supporters had even remained in the country. After all, there wasn't much football to be cheered on by all accounts. Italy needed a 2-goal win to merely need a draw against Belgium to make the final on the final day. Instead, they mustered just one, courtesy of Marco Tardelli in the days before he shouted his own name scoring in World Cup finals. Ron Greenwood did himself no favours in the 1-0 defeat by continuing with the haphazard approach of rotating his goalkeepers, Ray Clements and Peter Shilton, no matter what had happened, as well as dropping Trevor Brooke in for Ray Kennedy and bringing Gary Birtles into the frame. Birtles, a European Cup winner with Nottingham Forest, had virtually no time on the pitch as an England player to speak of. Dieter Muller in 1976, this was not, as England limped out just like everybody but Guy Tace knew they would. 19 European Cup medals between them, but not one meaningful victory at Euro 1980, as their belated triumph over Spain, courtesy of Trevor Brooking and Tony Woodcock, mattered little for either of the 2 eliminated teams. The true story took place in Rome later on that evening between teams who could actually qualify for the final. Essentially, Guy Tace's quote at the end of yet another goalless 90 minutes summed it all up. Belgium had defeated the Italians by Italian means. There wasn't an open eye in sight amongst the 42,000 snoozing supporters as Belgium shackled Italy to the requisite draw they needed. Italy scored once, conceded none, and was swiftly dumped out on goals scored. It really was the tournament that kept on not giving. I wouldn't normally pick up the 3rd place playoff, but there's special reason here. It was one of just 2 matches in the so-called knockout stage, so we kind of have to. For starters, it's one of those rare 3rd place matches that go the distance, rare if you don't count the glut of AFCON or AFC Asian Cup matches of the same kind that for some reason go all the way to penalties, all the time. Either way, Czechoslovakia won from 12 yards, just as they had done in 1976. Panenka scored again, just as he had done in that final, but this time it's just meaningless, and I haven't got the remotest desire to find out if he performed his trademark kick in the shootout. All you need to know is Czechoslovakia took bronze, Italy took on the most undesired of 4th places, and UEFA made it the last 3rd place playoff to ever take place in European Championship history. If 1980 was good for one thing, it's this. The following day, the pain finally ceased when Belgium and West Germany converged on the Olympico, still not at capacity for what was supposed to be an underwhelming final. Truthfully, it was neither here nor there. Nothing could live up to 76, and it didn't suffer from the tedium of 1968's tussles between Italy and Yugoslavia. Instead, 1980 got the final it didn't deserve when a plucky Belgium kept West Germany at bay until the easily predicted outcome transpired. Belgium was such great underdogs that the KBVB didn't even countenance the fact that they might need a hotel beyond the group stages. After a few frenzied phone calls took place, Belgium were in capable hands in Rome, and players had cancelled those cliched family holidays you hear about from players in nations that aren't expected to do anything at a major tournament. Jean-Marie Favre would recall that the players treated the entire tournament as a holiday. After all, they had nothing to lose, but they were probably the only team who brought something more than expected to the competition. Joep Durval was the only manager seemingly in the competition who took the Belgians and their incredible offside trap seriously. He would be able to conquer the trap, which he labelled a Maginot Line on wheels. West Germany were far removed from the glitz, glamour and skill of Gerd Muller and yet again found themselves relying on a battering ram of a centre forward. No longer was it even Dieter Muller but now Horst Rubrecht. The Hamburger SV forward found his first goal inside 10 minutes, and after Belgium looked their way into a penalty and subsequent leveller through René van der Eycken, struck again. Although the forward remained adamant in interviews after the fact that Belgium would have stung the West Germans in extra time, it was a lapse in concentration from the Red Devils that allowed Rubrecht in for the winner 2 minutes from time. A dramatic end to a tournament that deserved absolutely nothing. Euro 1980 did not work. Expanding the tournament from its small-time 4-team straight knockout guys was desperately needed, but UEFA made a grave mistake in its formatting. In the 8 teams, UEFA could boast the majority of the continent's big hitters. The problem was that they gave those teams an excuse to delve into the dark hearts of defensive football. At a time in the sport's history when it was played at a slower, more methodical pace, it was almost terminal to the competition. Aside from the fan unrest, the act of making only the group winners eligible for the knockout phase delivered a brand of football that was simply unpalatable. The official West German book of the event went to the lengths of describing the tournament as a hideous disfigurement. You could even extend that to Euro 1980's official mascot. Look at him. Just what the fuck is that? It was a fortnight that UEFA was keen to forget, understandably, with only a few stars coming out to play. In West German ranks, the duo of Bernd Schuster and Karl-Heinz Rummenigge delivered the greatest tournament campaigns, whilst the plucky Belgians were also a highlight. Elsewhere, it was a competition better known for its spoiling both on the pitch from the likes of host defender Gaetanos Correa, or off the pitch with the mindless hooliganism that continued to plague the game. UEFA were due to take their festival of football northward to France, and the competition was on life support. It needed resuscitation. Remain with us for tomorrow, the film on Euro 1984.